off Recovery Month. Thank you, whichever one of my staff members remembered to hit record because I always forget. So we are kicking off Recovery Month with this coalition meeting with Dr. Noel Vest as our speaker. Dr. Vest is a postdoctoral fellow at in the Systems, Neuroscience, and Pain Lab at the Stanford School of Medicine. As a formerly incarcerated scholar, he's a strong advocate for social justice issues and public policy concerning prison reentry. His research interests include the intersection of mental health, substance use disorders, poverty, social justice, addiction recovery, pain, and prison reentry. Dr. Vest received his master's and doctoral degrees in experimental psychology from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. So we're super excited to have him. We're going to let him talk for a little while, and then we will join him with our panelists for the second half. And as he is speaking, feel free to, like I said, to throw those questions in the Q&A. Take it away, Dr. Vest.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Give me just 2 seconds to get my slides started here real quick, and then I will get started. Amy, can you let me know that my slides are showing up okay?
Yep, we can see them. Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. I'll go ahead and get started. I'll just first start out by saying thank you. It's such an honor to be here today. Thank you to Amy and to everyone that helped kind of put this together. Hopefully I can illustrate the importance of some of these issues, and then also talk a little bit about my own journey from prison to PhD. So I put in the chat a link to this story. I think it really is a great story that kind of just gives a little bit of brief information on kind of my story and kind of how I got to here at Stanford. I'm not going to spend too much time on my time in active addiction or my time before prison too much, because I think that really the important part of this conversation is really kind of what happens once a person kind of turns that corner and wants to wants to find a career, post incarceration and post addiction, and that's where I really kind of found myself. And I'll just really quickly say that for me, I didn't really run into any external issues with drugs or alcohol, meaning I didn't get into too much trouble until about my late 20s. I went through a breakup, a long-term breakup at 24. And I honestly, I started making a little bit more money at that time, which were two kind of ingredients to just kind of start me down that downward spiral of addiction that you hear so commonly in people that struggle with substance use disorder. And that was generally my kind of the catalyst to my substance use disorder. I ended up kind of falling into this kind of seedy subculture of individuals and people that really just kind of committed crimes to enable their drug and alcohol issues. And so I was addicted to methamphetamine for about 6 years. And again, just kind of committing crimes to feed that drug habit. And so, that really ended up resulting in, a 7-year prison sentence where I was really, no more than a number in the Nevada Department of Corrections. And it was fairly early in my prison sentence that I had a conversation with my mom. And we were, just discussing how I had, how some of the turns my life had taken, and she just kind of, really kind of challenged me at that point to learn as much as I could about addiction. And I took that challenge because I really wanted to understand, not just why I became addicted, but then also maybe understand some of the reasons that other people become addicted. And I would say that that lifelong journey to educate myself on addiction really is a journey that I'm still on today. I consider myself, again, very lucky to have got started on that journey, because it's a journey that really is never ending, because I don't think you can ever learn everything about addiction, but I'm trying to slowly but surely learn as much as I can. So it was really, the beginnings of my research career were some really thoughtful conversations that I had with people that were in prison, kind of talking about their experiences with drugs and alcohol, and that has really led to or blossomed into a career. I would say at one of the most prestigious universities in the world here at Stanford. And so it's really been a really great journey to be on. And so I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics of this journey. I would say that while I was in prison, my educational career really started with these 3 books. And I would say it even started a little bit before the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It really started with a form of therapy that is in every prison cell that I've ever been in my life, or jail cell that I've ever been in my life. And that form of therapy is a mirror. I really needed to understand that, a lot of the issues that I was facing, a lot of the stuff that was going on in my life was not going to be fixed by anybody else. It was not going to be fixed by the justice system. It was not going to be fixed by anyone else other than myself. And so that self-reflection and that early work that I kind of did on myself was really, again, kind of one of those catalysts. I started attending self-help. Someone gave me this book along the way. And what this book really showed me was the power of community in recovery. And that, it was very difficult to remain substance-free or remain in a long-term program of recovery if you didn't have that sense of community, basically other people to kind of show you the way. The next book that really my mom sent in, it was really powerful for me at the time, was this book written by William Cope Moyer, who is the son of Bill Moyer, and then also he runs the Hazelden Foundation in Minnesota as well today. And this book really showed me that even though he came from a very well-to-do family and a very famous family, he ran into addiction issues. And so this book really helped me to understand that addiction can really happen to anybody, and that it doesn't really, look at what color you are. It doesn't look at, addiction doesn't care about how much money you make. It really is an equal opportunity infliction and can happen to anyone. And then the last book, which a lot of people probably know by now, because they made it into a wonderful movie, was this book called Beautiful Boy by David Sheff. And then the companion book his son wrote as well, which I read, by Nick Sheff, which was, both of those books were really just very important to me. And I think more so because what they allowed me to do was see the effects of addiction on my family. This book just does an incredible job of doing that. And so after reading these 3 books and a whole lot of other books while I was in prison, I had the idea. I started thinking about, what kind of career after I got out of the 7 years in prison. And so the only thing that I could really come up with at the time, and I know that this is very cliche as I speak about this now, was I thought that I could become a drug and alcohol counselor. I had never worked a day of hard labor in my life. These hands are not calloused over. And so, I was looking for some kind of office job where I could hopefully use the skills that I had learned in recovery to help other people. And so I knew I wanted to go back to school. And so as I was getting close to getting out, again, I started thinking about what that might look like as I got out. And my mom was very generous to come and pick me up at the gates of prison when I got out. And I had this conversation with them on the way back that I was going to enroll in school, and that's what I really wanted to do. So I knew I wanted to enroll in school, but I had a little bit of a problem, and that problem is that I was not the best student in high school, and so I don't expect anyone to be able to squint and see this, but I'll just kind of show you what the important part of this high school transcript of mine says. So when we look at the cumulative GPA of my high school transcript, this was my cumulative GPA, and I think one of the things that happened when I was in third grade was that I tested to go in what was called the gifted program at the school, the elementary school that I was at. And they notified me that I was not accepted into the gifted program. And so it devastated me. And from that point on, I lived up to that expectation that I had of myself, that I was not smart. I didn't get into the gifted program, so I considered myself not very smart. And so, I had taken some college classes, very, very luckily, was at a prison that had a college and prison program. And I'd done very well in those classes. But, I knew that this was, or to me, this was going to be a different world. And so I asked my mom and dad to drop me off, or I asked my dad actually to drop me off the day after I got out at Columbia Basin College, which was the local community college. And I said, don't come back and get me until I've signed up for school. And so that's what I did. I signed up for school. I went through all of the things to fill out a FAFSA and try and get financial aid. I did everything that I needed to do, and I got signed up for school. And I would slowly but surely matriculate my way through that AA program. And I did become a drug and alcohol counselor along the way. I was really, really fortunate to meet this lovely lady as well, who is now today my wife. We met in school. So I did become a drug and alcohol counselor. We actually both became drug and alcohol counselors. But I think anyone that has gone to school can kind of talk about this, or has gone on to higher education, can really kind of speak to this. I found myself while I was in school actually wanting more school. I wanted to go on with my education and not just stop with this associate's degree, but go on and get my bachelor's degree as well. And so I decided to transfer to the four-year university near where I lived, which was the Washington State University local campus there in the Tri-Cities. It was there I met my mentor, Dr. Sarah Chagresser, and it was also there that I discovered science and empirical evidence, and really, I fell in love with science, and my life was kind of forever changed. So, I knew that I wanted more. I knew that people along the way had suggested that, maybe I think about going to graduate school. I had the grades to be able to do that. I had kind of the clinical expertise because I was working as a drug and alcohol counselor. And so I decided that I knew that I wanted to go on and, wanted more of an education beyond my graduation with my bachelor's degree. And so I took a year off. I decided to study for the GRE, which I knew I was going to need to do well on to get into graduate school. I applied to 7 different schools and was incredibly lucky to get into one of them. I only got into one. And luckily, it was really a great opportunity to work with the mentor I had already been working with, Dr. Chagresser, but this time it was at the Washington State University campus in Pullman. And again, to say that this was a life-changing experience is probably the understatement of the year. I was absolutely thrilled to be able to go on and get my PhD from such a world-class institution. And so matriculated through graduate school, got a lot of really great was trained in some excellent statistical skills, which I still use today. In fact, I've kind of grown a expertise in cluster modeling that is, something that has really helped my career along, and something that I never really knew that I would be good at, because again, I thought that I was not very good at math or at school in general. And to find that today I'm using statistics to elevate my career, I would have told you that was crazy. That was crazy talk quite some time ago. It just wasn't going to be possible. But today, it is absolutely true. So I matriculated through the program at Washington State University, graduated with my PhD in the year 2019. And again, very, very fortunate to get a postdoc position working with Keith Humphreys, which some of you may know from his really very instrumental work on AA and some of the early self-help programs. His work is cited, probably over 50,000 times. He's just an incredible scholar. And so jumped at the opportunity to come here to Stanford and work under his tutelage. He's been an incredible mentor in my 2.5 years. And so, my journey also includes starting 2 collegiate recovery programs, one at Washington State University, and then one also here at Stanford. And the other cool thing that I've gotten to do is be a part of 2 Ban the Box initiatives along the way as well. And so that I'm going to make this really awkward transition and talk about Ban the Box in higher education next. I'm going to make that transition right now, but that's kind of in a nutshell. And I've obviously glossed over quite a few things, but in a nutshell, that is really my story from prison to PhD. And now I'm going to talk again a little bit about some of the work that I've done along the way. And so, when I talk to people and people tell me that they are in long-term recovery and then also go on to tell me that they've never been arrested, I generally have a couple of thoughts. If you have never been arrested and you are in long-term recovery, my thoughts are that you are A, very lucky, B, you are privileged, whether you know it or don't know it, or a little bit of both. In my experience, people that haven't been arrested, fit into one of these 3 categories, and it's usually sometimes it's a little bit of both. And so I want to talk briefly about some of the collateral consequences that we see with having involvement in the criminal justice system. These are just a few of them. So in a lot of places, access to education is limited. Access to housing, access to employment is almost universally. There are some restrictions to housing and employment. Volunteering at your kids' school. In many states, you lose the right to vote. There are a lot of restrictions on professional licensure. In some states, you lose access to either healthcare benefits or benefits for food stamps and things like that. And then on top of that, if you are released and on parole or probation, you are really subject to what are called technical violations, which can be a whole host of different things, and really sometimes are very much so dependent on the state, on the jurisdiction, and then even down to the parole officer that a person has, can be very, very tricky to maneuver those situations. And again, these are just a few of the collateral consequences. I think I saw a recent report that said that there are over 4,000 potential collateral consequences. My guess is that there are actually even more, the result from a criminal history conviction or a criminal conviction. So I want to kind of illustrate, and so I want to just kind of get people thinking about or imagining that they are going to be going to school after coming back from prison, and just first of all, the courage that it takes to even sign up for school and then get into school. And I think that this quote that I put on here really kind of illustrates what people that are incarcerated are feeling, either either explicitly feeling it because it's kind of they've ran into this quite a few times, or maybe you know um, maybe it's more of just a feeling that they have. This is a quote from the governor of Maryland when he vetoed the ban the box in higher education bill there a couple of years ago. And this again, to me, this really illustrates a politician that probably doesn't have a great understanding of what is happening in his communities. And again, I don't know that to be 100% true, but substance use disorder and mass incarceration are affecting every community. And if you're not under the realization that you need to have individuals with lived experience in those communities really leading the way and creating interventions that are going to actually work for these individuals, and that you need to train individuals with this lived experience to serve their communities. I think it really is just kind of a snapshot of again, just kind of the way people feel as they're going back to school. And so, everyone can kind of understand just regular old imposter syndrome. And then, you have this, what I would say is almost like a imposter syndrome that's multiplied by 10 when you are formally incarcerated, and you are basically walking around the school. This is how I felt for, the entire time that I was in an undergrad and in graduate school. It's just that you're constantly feeling your shoulders are clenched. You have this feeling in the pit of your stomach that someone is just going to tap you on the shoulder at any point and say, I'm sorry, but the jig is up. Your time is done here. We've uncovered that you have a criminal history, and you've got to get out of here. It doesn't matter how many times I've heard from people like, we welcome you here. We're aware of your criminal history. It's like I always felt like it just hadn't gotten to the right person that would look at it and come down and give me that tap on the shoulder. And so this is an overwhelming feeling of just that a person doesn't belong. And so I really like this quote from Michelle Alexander that came out just a few years ago, and it really kind of encapsulates how I feel on these issues, in that we need this movement that will end all forms of discrimination against people that are released from prison, discrimination that denies the basic rights to work, to shelter, and to food, because that's what we see very, very often. And again, I wasn't picking on Larry Hogan because he is a Republican candidate. You can really look, there are so many horrible quotes that I could have chosen from politicians on either side of the aisle. The 90s was just rife with this tough on crime, propaganda, whether it was the wording of super predators or non-redeemable, or nothing works kind of rhetoric. It was just tended to be this time when people were really kind of promoting this idea of tough on crime. And I think we've turned a corner on both sides of the aisle on this, and are realizing the importance of having people that are formally incarcerated in these positions, or people with justice involvement in these histories. And so I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the work that I and many others have done on Ban the Box in higher education, and kind of bring everyone up to speed on what Ban the Box in higher education is, or fair chances legislation. It's called a couple of different things. But the idea is that we're offering fair chances to education to everyone in a specific state, not based on whether they have a criminal history or not. And so this idea that everyone is entitled to an education. And so, I think that one thing that I always try and promote in these areas, I've always loved this quote from Glenn Martin, which kind of goes back to the last slide where I was talking about this idea that individuals that are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. But a lot of times they are furthest away from the power and the resources. And so I think that, an education is one of those equalizers that allow people to kind of raise their prospects as far as career choices, but then also in the work that they're able to do. And so I always think that this work should be led by people that are formerly incarcerated and their allies. Quick outline of the information that I'll go over here. I'll talk really briefly about why we need ban the box in higher education, where the work kind of began at, a little bit of the growth and spread, and then I'll finish up with whether this is a university, a state, or a federal issue. And so when we talk about ban the box in higher education, or fair chances in higher education, however you want to term it, we're really kind of talking about a ban the box initiative, which you can almost think of as a large umbrella of smaller initiatives. There are 4 that I really am aware of, where you have a lot of people working in those areas. The first is ban the box in higher education. So the effort to remove the criminal history question off of applications for college. And then you have ban the box also in housing. So for apartments to move into, ban the box for employment, which I think most people are aware of. There's quite a few states that have passed ban the box for employment. And then ban the box for occupational licensing. And these are efforts to remove criminal history questions or boxes from occupational licensing, and that can be as anywhere from becoming a barber all the way up to becoming a doctor. These occupational licenses, and so each one of these kind of speak a different policy language in their legislative world. I am much more familiar with ban the box in higher ed, but also understand that it is connected to some of these other things as well. And so what are some of the major findings? I don't think this would surprise anybody, is that the more education that a person has, the less recidivism that you see with those groups of individuals. And so you can see how the recidivism numbers drop with each level of education, where for, as you can see, a person like me with a master's degree or higher, any kind of graduate degree, the actual difference is negligible, right? There's no difference from me and a person on the street, statistically wise, whether they would go to prison or not. And so the recidivism rate declines immeasurably as we go up in education. Surprisingly, and I think that a lot of this is really kind of the backlash against some of the ban the box, especially and that I hear as far as it relates to college campuses, is that if you look at the research in this area, there's actually zero evidence to suggest that criminal history considerations are related to any kind of campus safety. That there's no statistical evidence that people with criminal history are more likely to commit crimes on college campuses. And if you dig into the research actually shows that some groups of individuals that maybe we wouldn't think of, binge drinking fraternity brothers, are actually the most likely to commit campus or crimes on campus. And then lastly, this idea that, what we know is that the question itself is discriminatory. There was a study done in 2015 where they looked at everybody that applied to the SUNY system in New York State, and they looked at everyone that marked that criminal history box. And what they found was that 2/3 of the individuals, so 66% of the individuals, didn't even go on to finish the application. They stopped right there. They didn't go on to finish it. what they also found was that of the people that went on to finish it, only 10% of those individuals were actually denied acceptance into the school. And so that means that there's a large portion of individuals that aren't going on to finish the application because they have heard no so many times associated with that criminal history box. So we know that the box itself is acting as a discriminatory tool that stops people from going on to apply to schools that they may very well get into. And so that was just a really, really important piece of evidence that we had come out of that particular study. Some of the early pioneers in this work are all friends of mine. They're really, really incredible. I went to a conference in 2018 where many of these people were excitingly talking about ban the box work that they had done in their state. It got me very excited, and I went back to my own state of Washington at the time, and worked on writing, advocating for, and testifying on a ban the box bill there. So the first two states to pass this legislation were Maryland and Louisiana. Dr. Andrees and Sarita Steib and Annie Phoenix got the ball rolling there. I mentioned that Maryland the governor had vetoed the bill there. The great thing about that state is they have an override, and they were able to gather enough support for the measure to override that governor's veto. And so they were able to be one of the first two states to pass that legislation. Then the work that I did and many others in Washington to get that bill passed. And then my friend Majid Muhammad got rolling in Colorado and got that bill passed. And then recently last year, I helped with some work here in California to get the ban the box in higher education bill passed here. And then more recently in 2021, both Oregon and Virginia have passed legislation as well. And so you might be asking, well, I wonder what's going on in North Carolina. Well, I have the answer right here. This is actually information that was gathered a couple of years ago, so it may not be 100% up to date. But what we're looking for here, what we'd like to see here are the schools in green. That means those schools have no criminal history question on their application as it stands in 2018, at least. All of the other schools do have some form of criminal history consideration on their application. And so, as you can see, there's a little bit of work to do, both at the school level and I would say at the state level as well. Anyone interested, I'll put my email information at the end of the slides, and you can please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help think through ways that we could get some legislation rolling in North Carolina. It's kind of like a side project that I have. And so, whether this is a university, state, or federal issue, I always say that it is basically all of the above. There are efforts in all three areas, and I think that they all build upon each other. Each level makes the next level easier, meaning that the more universities in a state that have passed this legislation, the easier it makes, or the easier it is for state lawmakers to recognize this as something that has support in their state. And then the more states that do it, hopefully we'll get the eye of federal lawmakers to pass this legislation as well. Brian Schatz, the senator from Hawaii, has actually started or has actually introduced this bill the last couple of sessions. Has really started yet to gain any real legs in the legislature. But with some help, I hope that we do see a federal ban the box initiative at some point within the next few years. And so I always kind of challenge people as far as what state is going to be next. And my hope is that North Carolina will be next. And so I always like to end my slide show with this slide because I used to think it was really important for me to get up and tell people all these changes that I made in my life, and that you need to be just like me, and if you can just find the motivation and do all these things. And then I started to realize, and people started to remind me that just because I overcame things doesn't mean that other people are going to face the same hurdles. And my journey is going to be different from everybody else's. And so what I've really tried to do when I either tell my story or even tell part of my story is I really like to talk about the systems that were in place that helped me to be successful, because those are things that can really help everyone, I think, be successful. And so I do like to talk about the systems that were in place. One of the systems that I always champion is college and prison programming. I know that we just reauthorized Pell Grants for students that are incarcerated, a huge step forward. I owe my life to the college and prison program at High Desert State Prison through the Community College of Southern Nevada when I was in the Nevada Department of Corrections. It changed my life at a time when I needed that change, or when I was really motivated to learn. And it, like I say, it just really changed my life. Barriers were removed. When I signed up, I talked about going to Columbia Basin College that day. I didn't see one question about a criminal history conviction. And I don't know what I would have if I would have seen one. I don't know if I would have been one of those people that just gave up. But my undergraduate career, I never saw a box, and I do not take that for granted. I do very much so appreciate that the state of Washington was very forward thinking and had removed those barriers already. I was in classrooms that valued lived experience. And then, I was also part of collegiate recovery programs that were receptive to the unique journeys and needs, I would say, of incarcerated scholars. And that support was freely given by individuals. And so, like I say, I always like to end it with, what can we do moving forward? These are the kinds of things that we can really keep in mind moving forward to make that transition easier for people that are coming out of prison and justice involvement. And with that, I will end, and I will open it up to any questions. I will leave this slide up for just a minute before I end my slideshow for anyone that wants to write down my Twitter handle. Please follow me on Twitter. I'd love to elevate your work. And then also my email address for anyone that wants to reach out on the Ban the Box work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vest. This is where I miss our in-person opportunity to, give you a round of applause and say, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being so open with your experiences, and just really appreciate you taking the time for this. We do have a couple of panelists. I'll ask them if they're comfortable turning on their video or opening their mics so we can see them. I can't see quite everybody, but that's okay. We have Dr. Melissa Reitmeyer, who is the Director of Field Education and a Clinical Associate Professor in the College of Social Work. We have Mary Wagner, who's our Director of Undergraduate Admissions. We have Kat James, who is our new Recovery Coordinator. And Maureen Grew, who's our Director of Student Conduct, who's on the panel as well. So would love to have some conversation about what Dr. Vest shared, and answer questions and ask him questions. And our folks who are participating, feel free to throw some questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and so that we can go along. And so I don't know if anybody is pressing, and Melissa, Dr. Reitmeyer, you're off mute, so maybe you want to start us off?
Yeah, I actually had a question. I just wanted to say, one of the things that I found when I first jumped into the role of Director of Field, and we manage practicum options for students coming back to school. A lot of times they're not the traditional age, they're non-traditional, and they may have had experiences, with the law. And we have over 400 students that are matched up with community partnerships. And social work also requires a license. You talked about professional licensures, and there are rules around that. And it's very difficult sometimes. I had to learn. I don't know that I was so good at it at the beginning, but you do have to have the conversation a lot of time with the students, because they'll ask us questions about how things might be impacted. And I think sometimes learning how to have a sensitive conversation with someone that feels supportive is so important as they begin their journey into a professional degree. Different states are different when it comes to social work and how they might allow you to practice once you get an educational degree. So it's always I always try to use a Socratic approach and ask questions, but ultimately, whether a student can get an internship, for example, becomes a matter of what the organization decides. We don't take a stand in that. It becomes the decision of the employer. But we try to do a lot to prepare students for that. We do ask them to share with us, but it's not because we want to be punitive. It's because we want to help them navigate the process. So I guess my question is, do you have any tips for those of us that are in a position to help students who may have a criminal background, had arrests, had warrants, have different things that may come up, depending on the setting, how we can help talk and work with students to navigate that process in a way that is sensitive to how they might be feeling? Because I've heard a million times the students say that they're just waiting for somebody to say, you can't be here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such an important, and it's why these things are so kind of, overlapping when I talk about them as well. And you're absolutely right. Every single state is different, and it affects people different ways. Quite honestly, if I would have listened very early on to people that were talking about the licensure procedures, as far as the becoming even a chemical dependency counselor, which was what they were called at the time, or a drug and alcohol counselor. If I would have listened to them, I would have never gone on and gotten what I did. And so I think that it's always important to remember that there are people that break the mold. There are people that appeal decisions. There are people that break their way through so that other people behind them can have that opportunity. I know that I've definitely been a part of that. I try and talk about it in all the spaces that I go into, because it is so important to understand that all of these things are connected. And I do think that it does matter how you voice the concern around that, right? Not in a, like you said, not in a punitive way, but it's a thoughtful conversation about, hey, there's no state law that says you absolutely can't do this, but there are barriers. This is what they may look like. We just want to kind of, make sure that you're aware of these things. And it really played into why I didn't go into clinical psychology. Honestly, I didn't do it because of a little excerpt at the bottom of a website that said, you may not be able to get these internship hours. I had just gone through a huge pain with some other work that I was doing. And I was like, you know what, I just don't even want to, I don't want to even mess with it. And so I went experimental psychology rather than clinical psychology. So these things are super, super important. And everything you raised, it all works together. But I think that, first and foremost, person first language, understanding that people are people first and foremost. They are not their, felony convictions. They are not, the mistakes that they've made in the past, and really having thoughtful conversations around these issues is really the key. But knowing that every state and every situation, every person is going to be a little bit different.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your acknowledgement of just a statement such as this may not be possible. Those are disclaimers that a lot of times are encouraged for us to put in the chance that we can't, or most internships can't. But I know plenty of students who have had, criminal backgrounds that have gone on to be clinical counselors, social workers, and they have not listen to that, but they have been prepared that they will have to have certain challenges, like go before the licensing board makes you answer certain questions. And then depending on how you fill out the application, a lot of times you have to go before them and give a discussion of these things. But we try to prepare them for it, but it really is tough on them. It really is like reliving something over and over again. So I wanted to emphasize that because it really is tough for people who are trying to move in a different direction and be successful and help other people because of what they went through. And I really feel we have to be more open to demystifying, destigmatizing what's happening in our country around this.
Thank you for that.
100%.
Yeah. I want to share, I'll put some resources in the chat for folks. As we were exploring this issue a couple of years ago, when we started this process of learning about, actually, when I saw Dr. Vest at a ARHE conference in Washington, D.C., and came back and said, I don't know how we're doing this in South Carolina. One of the things that we found is that a lot of folks don't understand or realize what is on their background or what is, and particularly if it's substance use disorder related, your memories of that time period may be hazy. And so South Carolina Legal Services here in Columbia will help folks who are trying to sort it out. Will help. It's a small fee to run your background, to be able to say, I know I was arrested, but I don't know what my charges were, or these charges were dropped, and so I don't need to disclose them to folks. And so just navigating, like understanding what is going to show up on the background sometimes can be a first step for folks. That's really helpful to be like, oh, okay, I can figure out what my answers are for these things. I don't have to list every time I was ever arrested when I was drunk outside of a bar. So that, I think that resource is really helpful. I want to put the spot on Mary Wagner for a minute, and I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about just that process here at USC and kind of how we handle the admissions and the question process.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of names in the attendee list. So I know that many of you know the work that admissions does, but for Dr. Vest, thank you for being here today. We really, your thoughts are timely as far as I'm concerned, because I think one thing that we in admissions did not have these questions on our application many years ago. And as the application volume for the institution started to increase exponentially, and mostly with out-of-state students, and selectivity started to increase, one of the things that I've found is kind of funny is that if you don't ask this information and somebody has a bone to pick with you, they're more than happy to volunteer that information on your behalf if they feel like you've been given access to something that they haven't been given access to. So as we often like to tell our students in panels and things like that, you may not be monitoring your social media history, but I can guarantee you your friend's parent is, and they're happy to tell us what you're saying on there. But I digress for a moment, simply to say that the policy evolved out of our not having a policy. And when the institutions started to get more applications and became more selective, and more people some people were getting in, some weren't, we started to see this rise in reported offenses or issues about applicants who were accepted. And we didn't have a policy for dealing with that. And some of them were more egregious than others. And they were issues that probably would be of concern given their recency and their severity. They would be of concern to the housing department. And so there was a large conversation on campus about adopting some questions, and the ones that we have on our criminal history, what we call our community standards series of questions, were ones that used to be asked by Common App. And Common App, we are now members of Common Application, going on our third year now. They this year announced that they're not going to ask this in their common profile section, but institutions that have these questions or are required to ask them can ask them in their supplement, which we do. And I will just offer by way of anecdote, one of the things that we've been having some conversations about off and on for about 2 years now is, can we get rid of these questions? And what I think a lot of people internally may not understand is that the admissions requirements are not set by undergraduate admissions, they're set by the faculty senate. And so what has evolved from the conversation of can we remove these questions is, what is it we're looking for? Do we want to take the risk of removing these questions. And then when you hear the kinds of questions that a lot of faculty ask about, well, what are we going to do about this? They have nothing to do with the kinds of things that we as an institution would can be considered to be deal breakers if we had deal breakers, right? They're more about things that are pretty arcane and really rare, and they're not about, is the student going to be harmful to another person or to themselves, and are we putting them in an environment in which we cannot provide them the adequate level of support? And another component that we offer each year, or one thing that we have to do, is we have to provide an annual report to the admissions committee on the number of people for whom the answers to these questions bar their admission. And it is less than 1/4% of all applications submitted, and we review 100% of the applications on this question. So our position is the juice is not really worth the squeeze, and the situations are not egregious enough to bar the student admission. And I would say 99.9% of the time, they are students who don't even live on campus. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, then why are we doing it if it's really about student safety? And what is the unintended effect of asking the questions for all the reasons that Dr. Vest cited, which is we're creating a barrier in access to the University of South Carolina. Are we really fulfilling our mission? And so I guess I offer all this context not to be defensive, but to say, what are some of the best ways of rallying the appropriate parties around the institution to come around, and how do you do the kind of education that you want to do? Because I've found that probably one of the greatest challenges that we have is we have some people in some very influential positions within the institution who have a very narrow view of this. And I always laugh. I said, I think the institution as a whole is giving the undergraduate admissions office way more credit for predicting student behavior than we actually are able to do. And we are experts in academic credentials, not in predicting future social interaction. So that's a lot, but tell me what I should do about this, Dr. Vest. You're the expert.
Well, that's, and everything you said is, I mean, you could take my job here. I mean, you really just, you nailed almost every point that I think is important in this work. And you're exactly right. I mean, we don't expect people that are admissions counselors to be experts in criminal justice sides of things, and to expect that is to me a little bit crazy. So one thing that I will send you for sure is a recent report by the it's the accreditation. It's like the industry. I wouldn't even say watchdog. It's the industry group of academic admissions counselors. They actually put out recently some guidance on this. And so I will send that to you. My guess is that you can use this to really drive home with some of the administrators at your school, what the admissions industry is saying, or what the experts in the academic admissions industry are saying around this issue. And it really just goes right along with that, is if you're going to ask the question, ask it later. If it's going to be regarding housing, if it's going to be any of those things, those are separate issues. And I do understand, like, there are certain, if a person wants to get into a field or maybe an occupational license that's going to require them to carry a gun, right? If they're going to become a police officer, those are things you'd really want to let a person know. Hey, you're probably not going to be able to carry a gun. It may not be a great idea for you to do this. It may, if you have limitations on where you can live, it may not be a good idea for you to live on campus, or you may want to have some of these things. But all of those questions can be asked after the person has been admitted or not into the school. And so most of the ban the box legislation has some kind of wording built into an after the fact, after the admissions asking, and the very, very few or limited areas where they can actually use that information to deny people getting in. The newer legislation does not even have that at all. There are no carve-outs whatsoever. But some of the earlier legislation, I know Louisiana has a couple of carve-outs for that. But what I can do is, like I said, I'll follow this up. I'll email you, as long as Amy can send me your email, or if you can maybe send me an email. I put my email in the chat. I'll send you that report by the it's like the ACRO or something like that. And then I'll also send you the actual bills that have been passed in other states so that you can kind of see what that might look like, and use that to guide some of the stuff that you can do with your administrators at your school.
I imagine there's some overlap between our students in recovery, and that several of them may have some background, but also they've got friends who are choosing not to apply to school because they're afraid that they can't get in. And so if some personal stories would help, Mary, I'm sure we can help pull some of those together for you, because I think I've got a couple people in my head that I know would be probably willing to speak to decision makers.
A conversation with someone at your university a couple of years ago, and I don't know that this is the case, but they were telling me that it was someone that worked at the school. I think it was in the CRP before Kat got there, that they worked in the school, and their husband actually had a criminal history, and that their husband could actually not come on campus with a criminal history. Whether they were a student or not, they couldn't actually come on campus unless they were going to a football game. And again, I don't know if that is true, but I was shocked when I had heard that. I don't know if that's actually the law or not, but that's what they were told.
Yes, actually, that person's husband had been trespassed from campus. So had been doing something, and the police had asked them to leave and given them you're not allowed to come back on campus. So it's not a general rule. It was a specific thing, definitely connected to his substance use. But it's been many years, and it was difficult to get a straight answer of whether he was allowed to come meet her for lunch or come on campus, because there does not seem to be, there's not an expiration date. When the police trespass you from campus, it doesn't end at a certain time. So yeah, it's it was definitely a unique situation that we encountered. I did this has not come up yet, but I wanted to make sure we mentioned that a lot of times in this conversation is the financial aid component. And while you can lose your financial aid because of a substance use violation or that kind of thing, you can get it back, and you are still eligible, even especially if you have past violations that are not current, or if you go through like a pretrial intervention or other diversion program. And so I put a link in the chat to the information about that, because I think that's the other thing we hear from folks who are interested in coming back to school, is that they think they can't get any financial, not only will I not get in, but then I can't get any financial aid to help support me. And that is just not true either. So
that rumor is rampant in the prison system too. I don't know what keeps that rumor going. And another thing to keep in mind for everyone on this call is that is actually going to be, that question is going to be removed from the FAFSA. That was part of the COVID relief bill and the FAFSA simplification, so that soon you won't even have that question on the FAFSA anymore at all, because it applied to so similar to what Mary was talking about, where it applies to so few people, it doesn't make sense to have it on there, and it's so misunderstood in the first place, because you have to have been on financial aid, receiving financial aid while you've gotten the conviction, and then not done any treatment afterwards. It was such a small amount of people that it actually affected that it just didn't make sense.
Well, thank you so much. Any final thoughts or questions? I want to be respectful of folks' time.
I do have a final thought. I just want to say thank you. It was really, really great questions. Mary, your insight on that was so, I don't hear often the insight of admissions offices. And so that's very, very helpful for me. Thank you so much.
Maybe we'll be next, right? We'll do some great work because of what you shared with us. That's the whole goal of this series, is to inspire us to do something innovative here on campus. Yeah. So
and please reach out to me if you do, because I would like to, I do have some resources for Ban the Box and higher ed.
Thank you. Thanks all for joining us. We will be back October 7th with Rionda Washington, who's going to be talking about the experiences of students of color related to drinking and racism and social justice. So excited to have all of you back then. And thank you for participating today.